Hi, I'm Christy. I'm a registered psychotherapist and naturopathic doctor, and this is Conversations with Clients, where we chat about things that come up in session in hopes that they're helpful to you as well. So today's chat was with a client who was new to therapy, and she was new to therapy because she'd been pushing it off for quite a while. It was something she kind of knew she needed, and yet the idea of having to tell her story, go through all of her history, was quite anxiety provoking for her. It was quite triggering to have to go through all of that. And so she was quite surprised when I said, "Don't worry about it. I don't need to know your story." She was kind of taken aback by that, which led us to chatting about what is the role of stories in therapy, and when are they helpful and useful, and when are they not so much. And whenever I explain this to clients, I like to use a story as an example. Most of us know the story of the tortoise and the hare. Most of us also know that this story is not actually about a tortoise or a hare. There is a truth in that story that is entirely separate from the facts of that story. So much so that if someone started debating the facts of that story, how far did they actually race? And what was the terrain like? And who was monitoring that race to make sure no one was cheating? You'd think they were a lunatic, right? You'd be like, dude, you're really missing the point here. You've lost the forest for the trees. And while that's really easy to see with those kinds of stories, it's easy to separate the facts from the truth. It's a lot harder with our own stories. In fact, with our own stories, our own narratives, our thoughts, our judgments, our interpretations, our beliefs, with those, we actually spend most of our time debating facts and completely missing the truth. All stories are symbolic, all of them, which seems like a really big statement to make until you remember that experience is built from the bottom up. Remember, it goes sensation, emotion, thoughts. Everything at this level, thoughts, narratives, stories, judgments, interpretations, all of the linguistic conceptual stuff is a symbol. It is a linguistic representation of what is going on at the lower levels, at the experiential levels. So all thoughts, all stories, all narratives, all judgments, all interpretations, all beliefs are symbolic. They are pointing at something, but they are symbols in the same way that the tortoise and the hare is a symbol. All language, all of our linguistic representations are symbols. They're helpful ones. They really help us communicate, help us operate in the world. They give us a shorthand to point at something so abstract. They're really helpful. But the problem comes when we start to confuse the symbol for what it is symbolizing. The menu is not the meal. The map is not the terrain. A description of the color red is not the color red. Our stories are not our truth. The problem comes when we start confusing them, when we take the menu for the meal, the map for the terrain, the description for the color, the story for the truth. We need to start to look deeper. If we believe every thought we have, if you buy in to every story that your mind creates, you are in for a bumpy ride. We need to train ourselves to look deeper, to find the truth that is pointing at. And that starts by recognizing we are not going to find our truth in our stories. We are not going to find our truth in the linguistic realm of symbols. The truth is found at the experiential realm. And that doesn't mean that we dismiss our stories. That doesn't mean it's not important. But we take them for what they are. We take them for the symbols, the signposts that they are. We use them to direct us to the truth. So how do we do that? Well, we start by getting out of our head and into our body. We start by connecting to the nonverbal story that is playing out in our experiential realms, in our bodies. I didn't need to know my client's story because I could read the nonverbal story that was going on. I could read it in the way she sat on my couch, the way she talked, the way it was really important that I knew everything and I had to, like, I could read the nonverbal story that was written in just her body language and how she presented. And that was much closer to the truth than any narrative she could have told me. At very best, this is like a linguistic approximation, and a kind of a bad one at that, of what is actually going on. You know, I walked around for a long time with a story that people are jerks. Probably wouldn't have framed it exactly that way, but that was the gist of the story. You know, I walked around tense anytime I had to engage with people, guarded and kind of on edge and really ready to go on the offense at the slightest whiff of jerkiness. And I spent years in therapy dissecting the facts of that story. Were they actually being a jerk? If they were, does that mean all people are jerks? On average, how many people are actually jerky on a daily basis? Years and a lot of money in therapy analyzing trees and completely missing the forest. You know, dealing with the facts of the story and never coming close to touching the truth. I didn't even come close to touching the truth until I started working with someone who didn't care about my stories very much. In fact, sometimes was a little dismissive of them, to the point that I started to think he was just another data point in my validity testing that people were jerks. Luckily, he was patient with me and he kept pushing me, guiding me to move from the story into the experiential realm. And as I did, as I started to get closer to the truth that my story was pointing at, you know, I found the truth of a little girl who was often treated quite harshly and still expected harshness everywhere she went and from everyone she met. And as I got out of the story and into the experience, and as that experience started to heal, that's when things changed. That's when the forest changed, when the experience of just being in the world changed. And I realized how much I'd been walking through life looking through the eyes of that wounded little girl, and how much it wasn't that people were jerks, but that as I looked through the eyes of that trauma, of that pain, I still expected everyone to be a jerk and everyone was a potential threat. And it wasn't until that was healed that the experience actually changed. And it didn't come from analyzing the facts of that story. And so obviously that took a little while, but it started with getting out of the story, getting out of the narrative, getting into the experience and getting closer to the truth. And a really good practice that can help us start that, because it is something we have to practice. We live in a very conceptual world. So it is something we have to practice to actually condition ourselves or counter condition ourselves to get out of that part of our brain and into the experience. And a really simple but powerful practice for this is to institute a daily check-in. Ideally more than daily, but start with daily. And the check-in is one sensation and one emotion. That's it. No story, no explanation, no reason why I'm feeling this sensation or that emotion. Just one sensation and one emotion. I think of it as like checking the weather. What is the weather like inside today? What is the weather like in this moment right now? One sensation and one emotion, which flexes that muscle of going into the downstairs brain and getting us closer to where we're going to find the truth of our stories. So that's my spiel on the role of storytelling in therapy. I hope it was helpful. If you have questions, I may or may not have answers. I will certainly try. Put them in the comment section below, and I'd love to hear from you. Take care.